Welcome to 30-Minute Reviews. I am Adam. First, some housekeeping before we get too deep into the thick of it. Title change. I made this decision recently when I was working on that and then also working on the last one. I'm talking about the book coming out in November, Echo Delta, which is the sequel to Echo Alpha. It's now Echo Delta Part 1, but it's going to be a 2-part book, because I really like an idea that I had, and I don't want that to be the end of the story. Like, I don't want that to be the third act of that trilogy, so to speak. So what I want to do is I'm going to split Part 2 into 2 parts and make it 2-part story to finish that out. So that's coming in November as scheduled. It's just called Echo Delta Part 1 instead of Echo Delta now, so get ready for that. And then the other thing is, what's it called? Has gone gold, so to speak, as they say in the video game industry. The Temple Outside of Time has gone gold. We have locked in the final cut of the manuscript. It has been edited, and the ebook version will be available as scheduled next Tuesday, I think. Or I don't remember the exact date, but it will be available in the very near future. I locked it in last night, so it is good to go. So, Temple Outside of Time, if you have not pre-ordered and you want to, it is on Amazon. You can find it there. It is, I like it. It's fun. It is the 10th self-published screenplay that I've put out, so you can, bet on that. And it's $2.99. It's short. It's included in Kindle Direct. So, it's not like you're going to sit there and worry about losing anything with it. So, yeah. So it's available next week. I forgot the exact date it's coming out, but you'd think I would have written that down before going on and talking about it. But it will be available next week. So, where is it? This Friday? No, I think it's this Friday. So, without further ado, last night, rather than watching that new show with Alicia Vikander on the HBO Max, I instead used my Criterion app and watched a movie from 2012, 2013, Frances Ha, which, pretty good movie. I enjoyed it, and the reason why I bring it up, and I don't normally, do things about movies that aren't recent, and this isn't to wear spoilers where we usually do a movie review, usually we do a lot of news here now, but I don't really talk about, older movies that often, and this older movie, it's like 10 years old, but, older in that regard, and one of the things that struck me about it is I looked it up after, and the movie is considered in the subgenre Mumblecore, which is something that I didn't know about existing until I saw this movie. And I'm like, well, what the fuck is Mumblecore? Because I had never heard of it, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's different and unique and something new that I wasn't, that I had never heard of. And I looked at the definition, and I'm like, oh, so it's just a dismissive way of saying independent movie, because the way it's laid out, it's like, oh, if what it feels like. Okay, so let me read out the definition to you. It is a movie that is defined by having low budget, amateur actors, and a very free-flowing comedic style, sometimes, or very free-flowing style in general, with a lot of improvisation. It also has a great, it has a relationship of people in their 20s and 30s as the focal point, and it is a, there's one other key point, I forgot what the last key point was, but it was, dialogue-driven, but not plot-driven, mainly being that the dialogue between the characters is more important I'm like, oh, there are a million of these movies that came out in the 90s. Like, and then it's like there's also like a horror subgenre, and the Wikipedia page includes VHS and that, and I'm like, well, VHS is an anthology movie, so I don't think you understand what that is. And I looked at it, and it's like it considers this movie called Funny Ha Ha, which I'm going to watch tonight now, to be the quote-unquote grandfather of the Mumblecore genre. And I'm like, really? It is? Like, because what this movie describes, like, Slacker, or really a lot of early Linklater stuff, to a T. Like, it describes Kevin Smith's early career. A lot of what made Parker Posey famous in the 90s before she, got more attention and into bigger roles, like Party Girl and these other movies that she did. It describes those kind of movies too. And it's like, okay, so arbitrarily you selected 2002 for this, because if you do it any earlier, like, it's not like if you look at Slacker, there's any big names in that movie. It's not like if you look at, like, Clerks, there's no big names in that movie. Like, that's the thing, is that all of these things kind of arbitrarily apply, and to arbitrarily set the 2002 date for it indicates that it's more designed as, like, a way to categorically dismiss movies that were made after a certain date that kind of fell into the same style as movies that were popular in the 90s. And that's kind of what it feels like. And I kind of want to know who came up with the name Mumblecore. I didn't read too deeply into it, but, like, I do feel like it is it is, there's no way to take it but dismissive. I feel like that's definitely part of the problem, is that there's no way to read this, read the way that this is called, and calling it Mumblecore, and everything that goes along with the genre. There's no way to do that and it not be a derogatory. Like, that's it's kind of a thing that needs to be, like, looked at in a way. Like, okay, so why is this movie considered this? What happened that we're going to consider this movie Mumblecore and all of that? And really what I'm going to do is I'm going to look into the earlier movie, Funny Ha Ha, and see what that is, because I'm confused. And it's like, you watch, like, Frances Ha, which is what I watched last night, and it's like, you can tell watching it, there's a very, like, French New Wave influence on it. Like, it's very, like, you can tell it's what they were going for. It feels a lot like a Wes Anderson movie in a weird way. And it captures, like, a certain amount of angst of, mid-20s, and you get this girl who is right out of college, and she's, she hasn't adjusted to being an adult yet. She's still being, herself as she was in college. And it's one of those interesting kind of, like, looks at a certain subset of that, and dealing with more, like, mortality in a way. It's a very good movie. If anyone out there hasn't watched it yet, it reminded me a little bit of what was that other one? Tick Tick Boom, in that regard, where we have this kind of arbitrarily set clock where it's like, okay, you have to become mature, you have to become an adult, and this person is kind of rapidly approaching that wall that has been kind of arbitrarily set either for them by someone else or for them by themselves. And as her friends go on to do bigger and better things, it's like, oh, her friend's dating a lawyer. Oh, her friend is, like, had a career in publishing. And when you look at it in that regard, and it's like, okay, well, she's doing all of this, and she hasn't done anything herself, and her life is kind of stagnating, and she's going from place to place. And I really like the device of using the addresses as framing devices, and framing it around, like, what's going on in her life is framed around where she's living and what's happening there, where it's like she's living in Washington Heights. She's living in Poughkeepsie. She's living in Sacramento. She's living in Paris. She's living in all these places. And, it's all about her dealing with, moving into the responsibility that adulthood is while not quite embracing that responsibility at the same time. Or acting like an adult. And when you open up, she's still acting like, she's the, got the safety rails of college on her. And it's kind of an interesting approach to it, to tell the story. So, I really like the movie. I don't know if that's abundantly clear yet. Considering I watched the movie last night at, midnight until 1 in the morning. It's very short. It's like an hour 20. And it's kind of like, I don't want to make it sound like I'm being what's it called? Silly, but it's kind of like a version of Clerks for millennials almost. Where Clerks was kind of this look at people who are working in jobs. They're very smart. They know what they're doing. They're quick, and they're all of that. And they're working in these jobs that they consider are beneath them, and they don't want to, and that is what it is. There's the movie's about asserting that these people are people and not just non-playable characters in your life. And where it's it does kind of capture that angst of we're overeducated, underemployed, and all of that. And while that movie does that very well, this movie does kind of a similar thing, where people are going to college, doing the right thing. It's right after the financial crisis, and the world's kind of entirely upended, and they are not prepared for what was coming. And then you also get to mix in, there's the beginning of, this is probably the earliest example in a movie of someone confronting the reality of social media, in a sense, showing a false sense of reality, and then that influencing your perception into going into the next, stage, where when Sophie moves to, to Tokyo, she and her husband start a blog. And this blog is designed to be, our trip, and look at what we're doing when we're living here. We're two Americans living in Tokyo. And, we see that, when, toward the end of the movie, I'm going to spoil the movie a little bit here, but toward the end of the movie, when Sophie gets drunk and meets with, Francis at the, some charity event at the college they went to, and that's kind of her last-ditch attempt to kind of recapture that and force herself back into that paradigm. When they meet there and she's wasted, she's like, look, I always thought you were happy. And she goes, well, if I posted reality, then all it would be is depression. And it's that people don't want to see that. And it's this great look at you're holding yourself up to this standard on social media that's not really reality. That's not how life is for these people in a lot of cases. They're not going to post the shitty stuff. They're going to post good stuff. And it's an interesting thing that a movie in 2012, 2013 had that foresight. And it was very ahead of its time in that regard, because it's something we talk about now when we talk about social media and the negative impact of it. But, this was one of the first movies to actually put it in the movie and have it be a plot point, where it's she's looking at the life that this girl is leading, living abroad, and how happy she looks, but in reality she's miserable. And it's a great idea to put that in there. I think that this is a great movie. I feel like this could have been a bigger thing if marketed properly, but I feel like it may have something to do with the fact that it's, written by a woman, about a woman, and it was I'm surprised that, considering where the world was in 2012, 2013, I'm surprised this movie didn't get a wider release and more attention to it. Especially considering, the stylings looking like, Wes Anderson, and at that point, Grand Budapest Hotel had come out. It looks like a, what's it called? It looks like, and the fact that it talks about, the mental issues that go along with, being a woman in society in that era. And even now, I mean, nothing about this movie is not timely 10 years later, which is disconcerting, but the movie works. And if you haven't seen it yet, it's on the Criterion app. It is definitely worth a watch. So we'll wrap up there for today, because I am getting to work now, and I have to call my insurance company on my way to work. So we'll wrap up there, and our next episode will be whenever something else happens. So until then, have a great rest of your week.